My name is Amara Quinn. I was 24 when I finally understood what I had always been to my family, the punchline. It happened in a ballroom drenched in gold light, 300 guests raising champagne glasses to my brother Julian and his new wife. I remember the exact moment. The microphone passed to my father for the toast, his eyes finding me across the room before he even opened his mouth. "And of course," he said, laughter already curling at the edge of his voice, "we can't forget Amara, our little late bloomer. Still figuring out who she wants to be, unlike her brother, who figured it out the day he was born." The room laughed. Not cruelly. That was the strange, unbearable part. It was warm laughter, affectionate laughter, the kind that comes when everyone in a room already agrees on something. They had all decided who I was a long time ago, and no one thought to ask me if it was true. I laughed too. That's the part one still can't forgive myself for. How easily my face performed it, how many years of practice it took to make humiliation look like good humor. I had flown in from Chicago for this wedding. I had taken 2 personal days I couldn't really spare from the architecture firm where I'd just been promoted to project lead, a fact I hadn't mentioned to anyone in my family, because experience had taught me that my accomplishments were received the way other families receive bad weather, acknowledged briefly, then ignored. My mother touched my arm afterward, still smiling. "Don't make that face, sweetheart. It's just Dad being Dad." As if a face could be corrected the way you'd correct a crooked picture frame. As if I hadn't spent my whole life being told the problem was my expression, and never the thing that caused it. I excused myself to the terrace. The night was warm, full of the smell of gardenias and rented string lights. I stood there for a long time, watching my reflection ripple faintly in the glass doors, and I thought, this is the last time. I didn't know yet what that sentence meant. I only knew that something in me had gone very quiet, the way a house goes quiet right before a storm reaches it. To understand the toast, you have to understand the arithmetic of my childhood. Julian was born first, golden and easy, the kind of child who made parenting look like something other people struggled with unnecessarily. I came 4 years later, colicky and watchful, the kind of child who noticed things. My mother used to say I was born tired, like my seriousness was a birth defect rather than a response to the room I'd been born into. There is a photograph, I still have it, folded into the pages of a book I never lend out, of my 7th birthday. Julian, 11, is front and center, cutting my cake because he's better with a knife. I am standing slightly behind him, half out of frame, wearing a paper crown that is too big and sliding over one eye. No one adjusted it. No one thought to. I became, over the years, the family's designated worrier, then the family's designated disappointment, then, once I'd built an actual career out of the sheer stubbornness of proving them wrong, the family's designated late bloomer. Each label fit like a coat someone else had chosen for me. I wore them because the alternative was arguing, and arguing in my family was treated as its own character flaw. Amara's so sensitive. Amara takes things too seriously. The story got told so many times that eventually I stopped correcting it, the way you stop correcting the pronunciation of your own name after the 100th stranger gets it wrong. Julian, for his part, was never cruel. That's what made it harder to untangle. He didn't mock me out of malice. He simply existed in the sunlight our parents had built around him, unaware that anyone else was standing in shadow. When we were teenagers, I once asked him if he ever noticed how differently we were spoken to. He looked at me with genuine confusion and said, "I think you're imagining it." He wasn't lying. He simply had never had to look. Standing on that terrace in my bridesmaid-adjacent silk dress, doing the arithmetic one more time, I realized the numbers had never once balanced in my favor, and I had spent 24 years assuming that was simply how families were weighed. I didn't leave the wedding early. I want to be honest about that, because the version of this story I could tell would have me storming out in righteous fury, and that isn't what happened. I stayed. I danced with my cousin's husband. I ate the second slice of cake someone offered me out of pity for standing alone. I smiled at strangers who complimented my dress and had no idea what my father's toast had cost me. It was near midnight, in the parking lot, waiting for my rideshare, when my mother found me. "You're leaving without saying goodbye to your father," she said. Not a question. An accusation dressed as an observation, which was her specialty. He said goodbye to me in front of 300 people, I said. I think we're even. She sighed the sigh she'd been perfecting since I was small, the one that suggested I was the exhausting one in this exchange. It was a joke, Amara. You used to be able to take a joke. I thought about correcting her. I have never, in my entire life, been able to take that particular joke. I have only ever pretended to, and there is a difference between tolerance and consent that no one in this family has ever bothered to learn, but I didn't say it. I had learned, over years of therapy, I also hadn't mentioned to anyone, that some doors don't open just because you knock politely. Instead, I said, I got the project lead position 6 weeks ago. I didn't tell you, because I already knew how this conversation would go. She blinked. For a second, just a second, something moved behind her eyes that might have been shame, or might have been the ordinary surprise of hearing news for the first time. That's, Amara, that's wonderful. Why didn't you? Because Julian's wedding was already stealing all the air in the family, I said, quietly, without heat. And because I've learned that good news from me tends to get set down somewhere and forgotten, like a coat no one has room to hang up. My car arrived. I got in. Through the window, I watched my mother standing under the parking lot lights, her wedding guest makeup slightly smudged, looking at me like she was seeing a stranger, which, in a way, she was. I had spent so many years being legible to my family only as the punchline that the sight of me setting down that role, even slightly, seemed to confuse her more than any argument could have. I didn't answer my phone for 4 days. This wasn't dramatic. I simply let it ring, and let the voicemails accumulate the way unread emails do. Urgent, and then less urgent, then finally just background noise. I went to work. I sat in on client meetings where people used my full title without irony. I stood in front of a half-finished building on the south side and told a crew of concrete workers where the load-bearing wall needed reinforcing, and not one of them laughed. It was strange, that contrast. How competent and whole I felt in a hard hat, and how small a single toast could still make me feel, years later, replaying in my head at 2 a.m. On the 5th day, I finally listened to the messages. My mother's voice brittle. Call me back, this silence isn't like you. My father's voice, absent. He never called himself. That had always been my mother's job. The emotional labor delegated the way household chores are delegated in unequal marriages. And then unexpectedly, Julian.
Hey.
It's me. Look, Mom told me what Dad said and what you said after. I don't actually remember the joke landing the way you're describing it, but I believe you that it did. I've been thinking about that photo from your 7th birthday, the one with the crown.
I don't know why.
I think I'm starting to see some things I didn't see before.
Can we talk?
Just us. I sat with that message for a long time. It would have been easy, satisfying even to feel nothing, to let my anger stay clean and total. But cleanliness isn't the same as honesty, and the truth was that Julian's voice sounded uncertain in a way I had never heard from him before. 28 years of sunlight, and here was the first small shadow crossing his face. I didn't call back yet, but I saved the message. Something in me, the same thing that had gone quiet on the terrace, was beginning, very slowly, to speak again. I met Julian alone, at a diner near my old apartment, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tastes like it's been reheating since 1994. He looked out of place in his tailored honeymoon return clothes, hands wrapped around a mug he wasn't drinking from. I want to understand, he said. Not defend Dad. Understand. So I told him. Not with a script of grievances, though I could have recited one. I told him instead about the paper crown sliding over my eye while he held the knife. About every parent-teacher conference where his achievements were announced before mine, even the years mine were objectively larger. About learning to preemptively shrink my own accomplishments so that announcing them wouldn't feel like stealing light that wasn't mine to take. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, turning the mug slowly in his hands. I used to think you were just, he stopped himself. I was going to say sensitive, and then I heard myself about to say it and I understood, actually physically understood for maybe the first time, what that word has been doing to you for 20 years. It wasn't an apology, exactly. It was something more valuable than an apology. Recognition. The thing I had wanted, underneath all of it, was never revenge. It was simply to be seen accurately, even once, by the people whose job it had been to see me all along. I'm not going to pretend the wedding didn't happen, I told him. But I don't want to punish you for growing up in the sunlight. I just needed you to know there was shade. He nodded slowly. What do you need from Mom and Dad? I thought about it, really thought, the way you think about a structural problem, looking for where the real weight was sitting. Not an apology performed for an audience. Just one honest conversation. If they can't give me that, I don't think I need anything else from them right now. The honest conversation, when it finally happened, was smaller and quieter than I had imagined in all my years of imagining it. My mother called and asked, this time without accusation in her voice, if she and my father could come to Chicago instead of summoning me home, the way they always had. I said yes, mostly because Julian had told me, gently, that our father had watched the wedding video twice since our conversation alone, with the volume up on his own toast. They arrived on a gray Saturday. My father looked older in my apartment than he ever had in my parents' house, as though the unfamiliar furniture stripped away some armor he hadn't realized he was wearing. I've been thinking about that toast, he said, before I could say anything at all. I told myself it was affectionate. I've told myself that about a lot of things I've said to you over the years. I don't think that's true anymore. I didn't rush to reassure him. I let the silence sit because I had spent my whole life rushing to make other people's discomfort disappear, and I was done doing that on command. I don't know exactly when I decided who you were, he continued, but I know I decided it early, and I never went back to check if it was still true. I think I mistook a joke for love because it was easier than actually looking at you. My mother reached for my hand. I let her take it, though I didn't grip back yet. We're not asking you to forget it, she said. We're asking if there's room, someday, for something different. I thought of the terrace, the parking lot, the 4 days of silence, the paper crown sliding over my 7-year-old eye. I thought of how much smaller revenge would have felt than this strange, unglamorous, entirely unfilmable moment of two people finally, imperfectly, trying to see me. There's room, I said, but it has to be built, not just declared. Building it took longer than the wedding, longer than the 4 days of silence, longer than any single conversation could hold. It looked mostly like small, unremarkable things. My father asking about my work and actually waiting for the answer instead of steering the conversation back toward Julian. My mother caught herself mid-sentence. She's always been the sensitive one. She's always noticed things clearly, and choosing the second phrase instead of the first out loud in front of me, so I could hear the correction happen. There was no single scene of triumphant vindication. I didn't stand up at some future family gathering and deliver the speech I used to rehearse in the shower. Real repair, I learned, doesn't look like the revenge fantasies I used to build to survive the years I didn't feel safe in my own family. It looks like patience is being tested and slowly rewarded. It looks like trusting people again in small increments, the way you test the weight capacity of a bridge before walking all the way across it. 6 months later, Julian called to tell me he'd corrected our father mid-sentence at a dinner I hadn't attended. That's not fair to Amara, and you know it, and that our father, to his credit, had gone quiet and then agreed. I hadn't been in the room for it, and somehow that made it mean more, not less. It wasn't performed for me. It had simply become true. I still keep the folded photograph in my book, the crown sliding over my eye, Julian holding the knife. I don't keep it out of bitterness anymore. I keep it because it's evidence of where I started, and I've found that you can't fully appreciate a bridge you've built without remembering the shape of the gap it crosses. I think often about the difference between the ending I wanted at 24 and the ending I actually got. At 24, standing on that terrace with gardenias and string lights and my own reflection ghosting faintly in the glass, I wanted my family to feel exactly what I had felt. The same hot flush of humiliation, the same particular loneliness of being laughed at by people who were supposed to love you best. I wanted, if I'm honest, some version of the room going silent the way it had gone loud, all those faces turning toward my parents instead of me. That isn't what happened, and I'm no longer sorry it isn't. What happened instead was slower and less cinematic and, I've come to believe, far more real. A family learning, unglamorously, to look at one another honestly for the first time in 28 years. My father, who still isn't a demonstrative man, now ends most phone calls by asking one specific question about whatever project I'm leading and actually waits for the answer. Last month, at my cousin's baby shower, someone made a joke about my being the career one in the family, the one who never settles down. Before I could decide how to respond, my mother said, evenly, without missing a beat, she built the community center downtown. I think she's allowed to be exactly who she is. It wasn't dramatic. No one clapped. But I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled since I was 7 years old, and a paper crown that no one had bothered to adjust. I don't know if I've forgiven the toast itself. I'm not sure forgiveness is a single door you walk through once. But I've stopped needing anyone to beg. What I needed, it turned out, was never an apology performed for an audience. It was simply this: to stand in a room with my family and be seen, finally, in the light I'd always deserved, without having to fight my way into it. The crown still sits crooked in that old photograph, but I don't wear it anymore. I never really needed to.